Dark Souls 2 is a great game. Even that statement doesn't do it enough justice. I think Dark Souls 2 is not only great, but on par with the rest of the Souls games. Hi, I'm Matthew, and today I'm going to be explaining to you why Dark Souls 2 isn't as bad as you think. Of course, in order to give a well-rounded critique of the game, I think it's only fair to point out its shortcomings. Dark Souls 2 changes a lot from the formula that Dark Souls 1 had and was reused in Dark Souls 3. Some of the changes were great, but some had to be misses. I'm going to start off with the smaller issues and work my way up to the bigger problems. Quick side note, I'm not going to be covering topics that I feel have been talked about to death, such as putting iframes into a stat, as well as enemy and bonfire placement. I feel as though discussing these, although I agree, wouldn't be an effective use of either my or your time. Fog walls in Dark Souls 2 behave unlike any other Souls game, and it's for the worse. If you haven't played the game, here's what's wrong. In the other Souls games, once you get to the fog gate before a boss or sometimes an area, once you press the button to enter, you are safe from the outside and can proceed in peace unless the wall stays open. In Dark Souls 2, however, they changed the mechanics so that you can be hit while in the animation of entering the gate. This wouldn't be as big of a problem if it didn't interrupt the animation, forcing you to have to restart it. Here's an example of it. This can make rushing to bosses very difficult and even feel luck-based. Some could say it encourages not rushing to bosses or employing more strategy, however it just feels like a poor execution of that philosophy and is not missed by anyone in the other games. I see the problem with the lock-on system in Dark Souls 2 not as a result of change, but more as a bug. The reason I say this is because it is very inconsistent on the range at which the lock-on ends. To further demonstrate this, I need to show you two clips. Firstly, here's a clip from the Lost Sinner fight. In case you guys didn't notice that, let me run it back in slow motion. So as you guys can see, he's jumping back, and then the lock breaks. Now here's a clip from a later boss, Scorpionus Najka. Now I don't think I need to explain myself here. In what world is this further away from this? My biggest issue with the locations in Dark Souls 2 are the size. For example, in Dark Souls 1 and 3, there are roughly 20 different titled locations. In Dark Souls 2, however, there are more than 30. How does Dark Souls 2 maintain that sprawling world design that the others have, while also having a similar gang length and about 10 more areas? Well, it doesn't. I think this is the most damning case against Dark Souls 2 that even I cannot defend. The other games have areas that take an hour or longer to complete, whereas the majority of areas in Dark Souls 2 take around half an hour excluding the bosses. While an argument could be made that it demonstrates progress to the player more effectively, the gratification for completing an area is lessened heavily as a result. Moreover, with them being so short, it doesn't leave a lot of opportunity to loop back into previously explored areas. The only areas that I feel pull this off effectively are the Forest of Fallen Giants and Dranglet Castle. Some areas do try to use shortcuts, which I applaud, however due to the areas being so short, they don't feel very rewarding. An example of this is the bridge you can drop down in No Man's Wharf. Aside from those few instances, the game resorts to just putting another bonfire as opposed to the looping level design found in the other games. Well, I've got everything that I found wrong with the game off my chest. Now let's move on to what I love about Dark Souls 2. Instead of formatting my praise through bullet points like I did with the negatives, I'm going to discuss it in a more long-form way because I have a lot more to say here. Firstly, I'd like to talk about the atmosphere. This is far and away the most compelling argument for Dark Souls 2. The way the game handles atmosphere is so different compared to the rest of the series, therefore I understand how many of the points I'm about to make will be seen by many as negatives and not improvements. I think Dark Souls 2 is darker than the other two games and I love it. Not like literally darker, although that could be argued, I mean tonally darker. I think the best comparison to make is Drangleic Castle to Anor Londo. Anor Londo, at least in Dark Souls 1, is bright and sunny. The castle, although inhabited with enemies, feels very alive with the various NPCs scattered around. Now let's look at Drangleic Castle. It's rainy and is built with a darker stone. It looks menacing from the outside. The NPCs here are completely different than in Anor Londo. Out of the three, one is a ghost, one an illusion, and lastly a decrepit old man. With that being said, I think where the atmosphere really comes in here is the interior. The enemies largely consist of statues that come alive when you get close to them. It makes the castle feel dead. That, as well as the way the castle is decorated, with the furniture and weaponry looking like it's been put into storage. Now, I'm not saying that one is better than the other, and the only reason I bring that up is because I think it's a matter of preference, and I just happen to prefer the more subdued art style. It's not just Drangleic Castle that pulls this off. The gutter is another great example, however on a lesser scale. Its darkness makes you feel lost, and that mixed with enemies that, although aren't really a large threat, still add a lot of tension. The heartbeat from the statues add pressure on yourself, which makes the gutter a terrifying area, and that was clearly intended by FromSoft. The obvious comparison is to that of Blighttown in Dark Souls 1. Again, I think it's completely down to preference. Blighttown is more in-your-face action, whereas the gutter is more psychological. The final area that I want to focus on is the Shrine of Amana. After finishing Drangleic Castle, I was expecting the game to continue to get more and more close quarters, but they threw me for a curveball. As I walked through the tunnel of roots, I heard singing and emerged to a huge open plain. The entirety of Shrine of Amana is very deceptive in its design. For example, at the bottom of the tower there's twinkling gold in the water, but upon going up to it you're ambushed by a hideous enemy. Upon speaking to the things that were singing to you earlier, you discover that they sing because they sense darkness within you. It's just so brilliant, and it's not just those specific instances. Throughout the whole game, saturation is turned way down when in comparison to 1 and 3. To many, this is seen as bland and uninspired, however I feel it was an intentional design choice by the developers. This doesn't mean you have to like it, but for those who prefer the original game's aesthetic, I think some credit should be given. It is my belief that each Dark Souls game was meant to be somewhat different from the others. This leads me to my next point, that I think Dark Souls 2 was severely hurt by the release of Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 2 sought to change up the formula with a new story and tone, and then Dark Souls 3 reverted back to the original story as well as the tone. I'm not saying that's bad at all, however I feel that's why many people think Dark Souls 2 doesn't belong in the series. Next, I want to talk about the movement in Dark Souls 2. It has been criticized by others for feeling worse than Dark Souls 1, however, I feel that it is improved by getting tighter and less confusing. For example, let me show you two clips, one from Dark Souls Remastered and one from Dark Souls 2. As you can see, in the Dark Souls Remastered footage, when moving in a circle it kind of stutters you backwards, which can be a little confusing, whereas in the Dark Souls 2 clip, you move consistently in a circle. Finally, I just want to mention a small change that I'm very happy about, which is the ability to sprint up ladders. Even on new playthroughs of Dark Souls 1, I missed this feature. Okay, now finally, there's been one thing that I've been very careful to avoid all mention of throughout the entire video because it takes my biggest problem of all the areas being too small and throws it out the window. I think everyone knows what I'm talking about. The Dark Souls 2 DLC is by far the most expansive and fantastic I've ever seen. It's got the best bosses, the best areas, the best mechanics, and we're going to get into all of it. Like I mentioned before, my biggest issue with the main game is the size of some areas, and how they aren't interconnected like the previous game. However, this DLC not only solves it, but is also better than some of the best parts in the other games in the series. Bonfires are reused many times, and it makes you feel like you're working your way through a massive puzzle when you are playing. Because each DLC is so different from each other, I'm going to discuss them all separately, starting with what I played first. Crown of the Sunken King, along with the other two crowns, is incredible. Emerging out of the tunnel to be greeted by the massive Shulva for the first time is unforgettable. It not only looks massive, it is massive. What I love about the DLCs is that they each incorporate some mechanic of sorts, however the ones in the Crown of the Sunken King are the most impactful towards gameplay. The first mechanic you are faced with is these pillar switches. They introduce it as a way of damaging and blocking sightlines of enemies, however as you progress through Shulva, it is heavily implied by the game that having a bow is useful for activating some of the switches and they become more of a movement tool that can unlock shortcuts or bonfires. I think this is very creative and opens up a lot of player satisfaction when you figure out how a certain combination of pillars work together to create something useful. After making your way through Shulva, you enter Dragon's Sanctum. Compared to Shulva, Dragon's Sanctum is very cramped. Starting off, you are introduced to a new mechanic that I don't know the name of, so I'll call them pressure tiles. This is where a bow becomes essential as many tiles are put in places not reachable by the player. I really enjoyed this area because it felt like going through an actual maze with hitting switches and having doors open up. The game also forces you to thoroughly explore this area because there is a required key to finishing the DLC locked away here. Finally, you emerge at the base of Shulva with these massive terrifying enemies. After using the Dragonstone to open up the path to Dragon's Rest, one of the best bonfires in the game is used here where you take an elevator up to the first bonfire in Shulva. Unfortunately, there is another secret bonfire further down in Dragon's Rest, and in my opinion the Alana boss fight is too much of a joke for either to be necessary to use. In my opinion, the Alana fight is extremely underwhelming and just feels like Nassandra's but a little bit harder. But the biggest miss here is that they decided to split the fight into two instances. One where she spawns a couple skeletons, and one where she spawns a literal boss. If you get the skeletons, it's a pushover, but if you get Velstadt, it becomes a challenging and fun gank. To end the DLC off, you fight Sin, which, unlike what came right before, is fantastic. Despite it being one of the smaller dragons featured, it makes for a challenging and fun take on a poison dragon boss. The way he flies around the relatively small arena for a dragon makes it feel very cinematic and special. Also, Cave of the Dead sucks. Similar to the Crown of the Sunken King, this DLC is a mix of open and enclosed areas. You begin in a room, only to emerge minutes later out to a wonderful view of an ashen land. Something about this feels so grand, especially on a first playthrough. After crossing the chain, the first mechanic of this DLC is introduced, the Ashen Idols. Although still interesting, I think it goes underutilized and it didn't become more complex after first being introduced like the ones in the Crown of the Sunken King. In case you haven't played the DLC, the Ashen Idols buff enemies, making them stronger. You can use a smelter wedge to destroy them, however I wouldn't recommend it since they are difficult to obtain and you will need them for the Fume Knight fight. After being introduced to this new mechanic, the most impressive part of Broom Tower is now showcased, its astounding verticality. What sets a lot of Broom Tower apart from the rest of the game is that you are always trying to go down. This is made clear at the start by beginning your journey from the top and ending at the base of the tower with a few exceptions. After this, the second and last of the mechanics of this DLC is showcased, the barrel carriers. Whereas the Ashen Idols are a seemingly pointless mechanic, I could see the barrel carriers used similarly to the pillar switches where they start off as simple and then transform into more complex ones. However, they never do. Barrel carriers, whenever in contact with fire or attacked, explode, dealing massive damage. This is mostly used as a means to explode some walls and kill enemies, while also being a hazard to the player. The problem with this is that I could never get them to work very well, or at least do their intended purpose. To this day, I'm still not completely sure how they work. Initially, I thought that they run away from you, however when you start moving, they seem to just glitch out and their AI goes crazy. This leads me to believe that they just walk the way you are facing. I know it's a stretch, but I can't figure out any other way that they operate, and I'm just not sure. Aside from tweaks to the AI being needed, they seem to be criminally underutilized. Having them explode near enemies to deal damage sometimes can feel more difficult than just attacking them. For example, take this clip where I'm trying to get this Iron Warrior to spray his lava on the barrel carrier, causing it to explode. The issue here is that by standing in the safe zone above the enemies, I can't command the barrel carriers through the metal bars. This leaves me no other option than just dropping down to where the enemies are, exposing myself to the fight anyways. Even while down there, you have to stand still to command the barrel carriers to go where you want them to go. With all the time it seems to take to set this up, I wonder if anyone actually does it this way, and I would mostly just prefer to fight them head on. With my rant about the barrel carriers out of the way, we could continue on. Finally, you arrive at what seems to be the heart of the Broom Tower, where there's a bonfire and multiple pathways that are at first blocked off. You then travel to another tower to collect an iron scepter to restore power to the elevators. I think this is a really cool concept of traveling to a different, smaller tower, and it feels very fun to conquer it. Unlocking the elevators in the tower is very nice because it allows you to rapidly traverse the area you just trekked through to quickly get where you need to go. Okay, now that I've said everything I had to about the area, I want to discuss the bosses, which I think is the strongest part of this DLC, with the exception of the Blue Smelter Demon, which I won't be discussing. Sir Alone is an optional boss at the top of Broom Tower inside a memory. Despite the walk back from the bonfire and the memory being very annoying, Sir Alone is one of my favorite fights. The arena, despite it being so small, is very grand. The marble floor and the view truly make you feel like you fought your way to the top of this tower. His moveset is also awesome. Compared to the other bosses in Dark Souls 2, Sir Alone moves quite fast and has quick attacks that get your heart pumping. Now to end it off, we have Fume Knight, which is my favorite boss in Dark Souls 2. Although the arena isn't as flashy as Sir Alone's, Fume Knight more than makes up for that with his mechanics. I love the dynamic in the first half of the fight where he has an ultra greatsword and a lighter one. The combos of quick and slow attacks can make for an amazing fight, especially if you are mainly dodging. The second half is great too. He buffs his greatsword in place for the smaller one. The coolest part about this phase is that he punishes you for being too close with his various keep-away attacks. It's a very fun game of running in for a hit and then getting out, not to mention the seemingly endless combos and moves he has in that phase. To end off our DLC journey, we have what is in my opinion the strongest of the three. Frozen Elysium Lois, in my opinion, is the best area in any FromSoft game. Yeah, it's that good. Firstly, the Snow Castle theme never gets old, it's beautiful. Secondly, the area loops so much that by the time you're at the last bonfire, you're only halfway through the DLC. As you move through the level, you collect the Eye of the Priestess, which allows you to see the boss Ava, which is accessible at the very start of the DLC, but is invisible. Ava's arena is the coolest part of the fight. Fighting on this massive bridge in the midst of a storm has a certain ambience that I really enjoyed. Ava's moves are well telegraphed, yet not predictable enough for it to be a cakewalk. I think this fight, aside from maybe Calamite, is the best example of a small non-humanoid boss done right. After defeating Ava, you speak to Alsana, who unfreezes and ends the snowstorm in Elysium Lois. This is where Crown of the Ivory King employs the most creative way of expanding an area I've seen in a very long time. A lot of things that were previously inaccessible open up, such as new loot and a new path through the area. This then causes you to basically go through the level again to find the 4 knights to defeat the Burnt Ivory King. I love this, and it made an already huge area expand and then link back in a super satisfying way. Now I don't want to end the DLC off on a bad note, so I'm including this now. Frigid Outskirts is a cool and unique area, for the first time you go through it. I hate the Frigid Outskirts because it's actually a pretty cool idea, however it fails so hard from small oversights by the developers. The concept of being able to see for a little and then being blinded and having enemies attack you is really interesting, however it's marred by how long the storm lasts and the seemingly unlimited spawning of the reindeers. Also, there definitely needs to be a bonfire there either at the first or second house, because the trek back each time to the boss feels way too long. Hell, at least put one at the start of the Frigid Outskirts so you don't have to watch the stupid coffin loading screen every time you die. These small issues go on to the boss as well. Fighting one Ava is fun, fighting 2 Avas after a long walk from a bonfire is not. This is the only boss in the game that I consistently summon NPC help for, not because it's more difficult than some others, but because I can't bother to spend 8 minutes walking back to die in 1 minute. With that out of the way, let's talk about the Burnt Ivory King. Dropping down with the 4 knights you rescued feels so epic. And so does fighting the other enemies with your knights. After fighting through them, the Burnt Ivory King comes out of this massive portal that's only a teeny bit copying Oblivion. He has similar moves to Sir Alone, only being a little slower and a little stronger. His aerial and dash attacks are fast and tough to dodge. It's an epic conclusion to the DLC and one of my favorite fights. I really hope that I've provided some valid points for Dark Souls 2 being not just great, but special. It's different, but that shouldn't mean it's worse. Although overlooked, Dark Souls 2 is a valid addition to the series that shouldn't be forgotten. Thank you all for watching, this is Matthew Monigal, and I'll see you guys later.